All right, let's begin. So before we start, we're gonna go through quiz 4. So the first question asks you to identify all the value of x from the list candidates, which contain these elements here, and for each questions, the value of x that this expression is true. Okay. So for example, for the first question, we have x must be less than 0 and x greater than 100. Now, if you think about it, for an integer x to be less than 0 and more than 100, this is impossible. Okay, so it's a non-value. There's no value, no integer, in particular, no integer in the candidates for which it can satisfy this Boolean expression, for which it must be less than 0, it must be negative, and more than 100. Number that is less than negative cannot be more than 100. Okay, now for the second one, instead of and now, we have an or operator. So as long as one of them is true, then the whole expression is true. Okay, so basically we're looking for a number that is negative. X less than 0 means that it's negative, and greater than 100. Okay, so those numbers that are negative are going to be true for this Boolean expression. So 101 minus 1. Okay, and those that are more than 100, for example, 101 and 200, this will make this Boolean expression true. Now, let's look at this. This is basically asking you to find a number that is less than equals to 0 and less than equals to 100. Now, what's the solution? So for this Boolean expression to be true, it must be true for both. It must be less than equals to 0, okay? And also it must be less than equals to 100. All right, so first of all, it has to be negative or 0, all right? So if you look at it, these are the negative numbers and 0 numbers, okay? And they must be less than equals to 100 for sure. And a number that is less than equals to 0 is obviously less than equals to 100, okay? So these are the only numbers that are for which is true, all right? So you have to be true on both expressions here, all right? So this is easy. Now, this also make you think that if you look at this expression here, by the way, students often write these kind of expressions. So a little bit remark. You have to learn for loop, for example, it will say something like this. If x less than equals to 0 and x less than equals to 100, then print x. Okay, for something like that, for example. Now, if you look at this expression here, again, for x, if x is less than equals to 0, then definitely x is less than equals to 100. So it's become redundant or unnecessary to check these Boolean expressions. Okay, so this is completely redundant. All right, so the point is that when you make Boolean expressions, when you create your condition to test, okay, always think, is this necessary conditions? When you already wanted it to be less than equals to 0, obviously it has to be less than equals to 100. So it becomes unnecessary to do such a test. Now here, we're asking for less than equals to 0 or is more than equals to 100. Okay, so this is negative, so or 0 number, and those they are more than equals to 100. So or means as long as one of them is true, the whole expression is true. So you look for all those that are less than equals to 0. So these are, and all those that are more than equals to 100. So that would be here, all right? Now E, those that are greater equals to 0, so non-negative means they are positive or equals to 0, and those that are less than equals to 100. All right, so this is those that are greater equals to 0 and less than equals to 100. That will be in this range here. All right, so more than equals to 0 and less than equals to 100. Now, how about this part here? No, this part, it wasn't put into the answer sheet, so I give bonus mark to all of you for number 8, for F here. It's asking you not x greater equals 0 and s less than equals to 100, where these expressions are in the bracket. Okay, so this basically is a negation of the previous part. Okay, so whatever value here satisfy these Boolean expressions. So we want to negate it. So whatever value here becomes false in these expressions. So those are being excluded. So these will become false in this negation here. All right. So basically, everyone here except those that are true here will be true here. Okay. So that will be here. It will be this, and followed by this. All right. Now, questions 2. So we're asking you to build a Boolean expressions where username is based on user input, which is a string. So whenever you ask user for input, always think, what is the type here? Do we do typecast or not? In this case, there is no typecast, so username is of type string. And I say that a username is valid if the length of the username is less than 10, and it must contain only alphabets. All right. And there are some hints here. You're going to use isAlpha method. Okay. So first of all, we want to build 2 Boolean expressions joined by AND operator. Right. The first expression will be the length of the username is less than 10. So this is the functions to calculate the length. The length of username is less than 10. And it must contain only alphabet. So it will be username dot is alpha. Okay. So some of the mistake the student make is that so is alpha is a method. Okay. It's not a function, it's a method, which means it applies to some object. Okay, it's used using dot. All right. So some of the students wrote something like this: is alpha username. So this is wrong because there is no built-in function of isAlpha. Okay, there's only built-in method, and built-in method is done using dot applied to what you want to apply. The object is username. All right, so it's username dot isAlpha. And some of you, for example, put this username dot isAlpha. That's it, without the bracket. Okay, so this is wrong again. All right, what you do is alpha username dot alpha actually tell you that this is a method name, but it didn't execute that method. Okay, so this is wrong. A parenthesis is required. Okay, otherwise it's just the name of the method. It's not executing that method itself. Okay, so a parenthesis is required. All right, and another thing is that some of you, not this quiz, but a lot of like previous quiz, username for some of you put a different name, such as this. So now I have a length of name less than 10 and username dot is alpha, for example. And this is inconsistent of name, for example. And where is name? Name is never defined. We only define username over here. Okay, so there are marks deducted for this. So pay attention to some of these. All right. Okay, good. Now, let's look at last week. We talked about if statements. So to open this link, you need to do right click, open in new tab. Some of you are still asking me the same question, so I want to demonstrate to you one more time. Now, let's go to, there's one last thing that I want to mention about if statements, one last example. So if you remember earlier on, we have this class list full of initials, your initial. And then I asked, so just put in your initial here. And then to get the index number of your initial, you just do class list dot index initial. Basically, you find the index of initial, which is the value of a string MACA, okay, in the list class list, okay? So it will return the index. For example, MACA is at index 6 because this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this MACA, the initial, the student with this initial have index 6. Okay, so let's do an experiment. All right. So suppose the student didn't know that the initial has to be, so student basically don't have this list. Okay. So it doesn't know that the initial, he knows that the initial is the first 2 characters of the last name first two characters or the first name, but he doesn't know that it's the first character of the last name and the first character of first name has to be capital. So you do something like this. Okay, let's see what we get. So we get an index value error. It says that MACA is not in the list. Okay, so if you want this to be user-friendly, you don't want to let the user see this value error, because you don't expect user who use this program actually understand Python, actually know what is value error. So you want to create a meaningful message to it. All right, so we need to use, whenever you want to deal with errors like this, you want to give meaningful message to user, you need to scrutinize which part they give errors. And then for this part, you need to give an if statement and then print some meaningful message. So here's, for example. So before you run .index, okay, so .index will not give you error if initial actually is inside the class list. Okay, so note that if initial is in the class list, okay, so initial is in the class list, there will be no error. There will be no error. However, if initial is not in the is not in the class list, then there will be error. And this is the part that you want to take it out as a Boolean expression in an if statement to write a print message. Okay, so display a meaningful message. Right, so we're going to create a Boolean expression to check whether it is in the class list. Okay, so if initial is in class list. So remember, we can use the operator in to check whether some element is inside a list. Okay, this will be true if this initial here actually is in the class list, and it will be false otherwise. Okay, so if the initial is in the class list, then you execute this, remember? So when you do a colon here, you press enter, immediately it will intend it for you. So you press here and make sure everything is intended properly, okay? So here, for example, so if it's in the class list, we execute this .index method on class list to find the index and you print the index. Else, if it's not in the class list, all right, then you can't execute this .index method. It will give you value error as we have shown here. So instead, you're gonna print the message, print the initial marker is not in the class list. All right, so we can do .format initial, for example. So again, remember, this is a placeholder that will replace by the value defined by the variable initial. So let's check. Here it says the initial marker is not in the class list. Now, if I create a new one that is now is correct. Okay. Example. Now it will just print the index. Of course, you can do meaningful message such as your index is, say, index. Okay. So this will be giving meaningful messages for both cases. All right. Now, this is one thing that I forgot to mention on last week. Now, today, we're going to learn a new topic called iterations. Now, if you remember correctly, so what this .index is that it looks for the value of initial in the class list. So basically, essentially, it's basically like a search algorithm. You're searching for the value of initial, the value of marker in particular in this class list. Okay, so it's gonna look for every element here, which one is match marker, and then return the index. So essentially, index is like a search algorithms in a certain sense. Now, if you remember on our very first lecture, okay, we talk about a solution to searching. So .index method is built in Python. Now, if you were to ask to create your own, this is one solution to searching. All right, if you see all these red marks here, these are the if statement. We're checking whether the element is equal to target. If yes, we do something. If no, we do something else. All right. And then there's also another thing called repeat. So you already know how to use if statement and also else statements and so on. Now we're going to learn how to do repeat. We're going to repeat this step 3 again if certain condition is satisfied. So this is what we're going to learn for today, called iteration. So repetition is also called iteration. Okay, so whenever you talk about iteration, you know it means you repeat a certain block. Okay, so the first iterations that we're going to write is called a for loop. Okay, so again, iterations, repetition, loop, these are similar things. Basically, you're going to go back to the same thing, repeat again, go back to the same thing, repeat again. That's called a loop. So what is a for loop? So everything in Python or in other programming languages, program essentially is like a for chart. It's a flow chart. So it basically states that you have an iterable. So some of the iterables that you know of are list, string, set. These are all iterable. Okay. It basically says for x in this iterable, such as list, you're going to run this statement for every element. So you can translate to for every element in this iterable, either list or string or set, you're going to run this statement. Notice there is also an indentation here, represent that this is the block that you are going to execute for every element in this iterable. So the idea is that you starting point, you start with the first element, okay? You check whether first this is the last item, okay? So if this is the last item, this is n. If this is not the last item, there is a next number. You execute the 2 statements that you have in this block. So we're going to look at an example here. So again, most of the code, half partial codes is already available in the weekly update. You have to go right click and open link in new tab. All right. So let's look at one example. We're going to use our typical example quiz, which is a list, which is a score for each quiz. So suppose there are 11 quizzes, and each quiz is given a number. So quiz 0 score is 5, quiz 1 score is 3, quiz 2 score is 3, and so on. So these are all the score for students, one particular student's, all the 11 scores, okay? Now, suppose I want to print out every single element. So what I'm going to do is that for element in quiz, or for score in quiz, for example. So this quiz corresponds to this list here. I'm going to print score. Okay, so we basically run a for loop, or we iterate it. Okay, so we run a for loop. So this is called run a for loop over elements of a list. So here in this example, we run a for loop over elements in the list called quiz. Okay, for every score in quiz, I'm going to print score. So let's see what do we get here. It basically take the first element of quiz, called 5, and store it in the variable score. So score is a variable that change value at each iteration. So at the first iteration, score will have the value 5, and then it will print score. Score is 5. Okay, now it's going to repeat again. It's going to go back to the subsequent element, which is 3, and store it into the variable score. So score now has the value 3, and it's going to print score, which is 3. Now it's going to repeat again. It go to the quiz again, go to the next element, which is again 3, and it store this value into the variable score and print score again, and you get 3. And then you don't stop, you continue. It's for every score, every element in quiz. So the subsequent value to try is 4, all right? So 4 will be stored in the variable score now, and then when you print score, you get 4, and so on and so forth, until the last one. Suppose the last one is 4, so score is equal to 4, and you print score, and that's the end. Okay, so you basically take every element in this list quiz here, store it into the variable score, and then you execute the block here, which is just to print that score. All right, so just to write down. So we say that this is iteration or repeat, because so this is a break ampera term for all the loops. It doesn't have to be for loop. It can be while loop. It can be other loop that is possible, that is written by the developer. So this is just one way of write iteration using for loop. Okay, so iteration over elements of list can be done using for loop in this way. So at first iterations, at the first round, it means at the first round, so score has the value of, score has the value of the first element of quiz. So which is 5. Okay, and it doesn't stop here. It goes to the next iterations. Okay, at second iteration, score has the value of second element of quiz. So which is 3, and so on and so forth. So continue until the end of the list. Okay, so in particular, if the list has 11 elements, it will run for 11 iterations, or 11 rounds, 11 iterations, 11 loops. Okay, it will run 11 rounds. All right, so this is for score. Okay, now we just basically print out each element or each score in the quiz. All right, now but this is not informative enough. For example, if I want to know the quiz score of, say, the score of quiz 6, so I have to count it myself. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, quiz score of 6 is this. All right, and if I want to know all the numbers that are all the quiz score, all the quiz number that has scored less than 3, I have to do it by myself. And anything that is manual is not good for us. So we're gonna do something more. We're gonna print out the quiz number for each score. So now, instead of iterating over elements of the list, we're gonna iterate over the indices of the list. Okay, so we're gonna do iteration over the indices. Okay. So iterations over indices of a list. Okay, so remember, indices starts from 0. Okay, and the next value is 1, subsequent value is 2, and so on. So what is the last value of index? What's the last value of index? If the list has 11 elements, what is the last value of index? 10. Good. It will be 10 if it has 11 elements. So it will be the length of the list minus 1. Okay, that's the last value of index. All right. So we're going to run a for loop over the indices of quiz. Okay. So we're going to change this later on. So what we're going to do is that we're going to run for index in. So we start with 0, 1, 2, 3. Suppose there are 11 quizzes, I think. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. So now I'm not iterating over elements in the list. I'm not iterating over the list, but I'm iterating over the indices of the list, which is start from 0 and the 10th. All right. Okay. And for each iteration, I assign this value 0 to index. And the second iteration, I assign the value 1 to index. In the subsequent iteration, I assign 2 to the variable index, and so on. So for each of them, what I'm going to use is that I'm going to retrieve the quiz of the index. Okay. So I'm going to print, say, quiz index. So this is number of the quiz. Quiz 0, quiz 1, quiz 2, and so on. Has score something. Okay, so dot format, that will be your index. All right, and that will be your quiz and index. So this is how, remember, this is how you retrieve the elements at a certain index of a quiz. Okay, so let's print it. So I have quiz 0 now has score 5, quiz 1 has score 3, and so on. And quiz 10, which is the last quiz, has score 4, which is exactly the same as before, 5, 3, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 0, 5, 3, 4. But we give a meaningful indication of which quiz corresponds to which score. Okay, this is made possible because I iterate over the indices. The indices give me the number correspond to each quiz. And this number, this index here, also allow me to retrieve the value at the index of that quiz. All right. Now, so in our iteration here, I run a for loop over indices of quiz, which is integers from 0 to 10, because we have 11 quizzes here. And the last index is 10, which is the length of the quiz, which is 11 minus 1, because we start counting from 0. And at first iteration, this is no longer score. My variable is index. So at the first iteration, index has value of the first element of that list I iterated with, which is the indices, which is 0. Okay. And second iteration, index now has the value of 1. And at the third iteration, index now has the value of 2, and so on and so forth until the end of the list. And again, we have 11 elements, so it will run for 11 iterations or 11 loops. So now you see the difference here. Now I run not over the elements in the list itself, I run it over the indices, okay? And here, previously I run over the elements in the list itself, all right? Now, which one we should do? Shall we iterate over the element itself or the indices of the list itself? So it depends on the questions, all right? So iterating over the indices has the advantage of identifying the elements in the list and its corresponding index, all right? But if you were just trying to display the score without having, you don't have to know the index, you don't need to know that, then you can just do iteration over the element in the list, okay? So one other things, when you're iterating over the indices, you need to make sure that the indices are valid, okay? So remember, for example, one of the biggest mistakes the students make is this. So they assume because it has 11 quizzes, so they think that the last index is 11. So when you do that, all right, so at first, index will have the value 0. So 0 will be assigned to the value index and it will print quiz with the value index 0. Quiz 0 has score quiz square bracket 0, which is 5. So it will take 1 to the value of index, 2 to the value of index in the subsequent iteration, and so on until 10. 10 will be the value of index, and it's still fine. Quiz 10 has score 4. And then it will go to the next element, 11. And the value of 11 will go to the variable index. So index now is 11. It's going to print quiz 11 has score. And then it's going to try to retrieve the value of quiz at index 11, which is not existent. Okay, there are only 10 elements in the quiz, so you count from 0. The last index has to be 10. It's not 11, so we have an index error. So it becomes very important that when you're iterating over the indices, you know exactly how many are they in order to do that. Okay, now, as I mentioned before, it doesn't work just with list. It also works with other iterables, list, string, and set, for example. Let's give you a very simple example. Say for X in, say, A, B, C, D, E, gonna print X. So what do you expect can be displayed out? A, B, C, D, E, yes. So what is the value of X at the first iteration? the value of x at the first iteration will be a, the value of x at the subsequent iteration will be b, the value of x at the next iteration will be c, and then continue, x will be d, and then x will be e. And every single iteration, you print s. Now, let's look at another example. Say for x in, I'm going to cast it into set. Say 2, 1, 4, 3. Okay. So this is a set. Okay, remember set is an order sequence, and it also does not store a value more than once. So in particular, this is what I type here. But when it's stored, it's only stored 2, 1, 4, 3 instead of 2, 1, 4, 3, 1. All right. So if any duplicates, it will not store again. All right. But when I run this print, when I run the for loop over this set, you will see that because set is an unorder, what is stored is different from what I type. Okay. So when you run it, it's run it over what is being stored. Okay. So it is stored as 1, 2, 3, 4. What I type is not what is being stored. When I create this data structure and when you execute it, it stores it differently. In particular, it takes out the duplicates value, and it might arrange it in some way. So this is in particular out of the scope here. So suppose it store is 1, 2, 3, 4. Now x will take 1 at the first iteration, x will take 2 at the second iteration, x will take 3 at the third iteration, and so on. All right. Now, if you look at these indices here, if I have a list, if I have, for example, 100 quizzes, I don't want to write 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way to 99 if I have 100 quizzes, right? So I don't want to manually write out this number. First of all, it's prone to error. Second of all, it's very tedious to write 100 digits here, 100 numbers here. So is there a way to automate this? Is there a way to write this without having to explicitly write out each number from 0 all the way to 99? And again, if you come in computer programming class, you know that developer creates such a way for us to do that without having to explicitly write out each number for 99 of them, okay, from 0 to 99. So this is what we call range, okay? So if you do help, if you do range, so this is a function. Return an object that produces a sequence of integers from start inclusive to stop exclusive by a certain step. So this is a function that takes two values, start and stop, with an optional value step. Okay, so it's gonna create or produce a sequence of integers starting from the start value, all right, including start, all the way to stop, but excluding stop. Okay, so exclusive of the stop value by step. So we're gonna look at one example. Okay, so say range for I in range, say 10 or 11. For I in range 11, or say 0, 11. Okay, so range 0, 11 is going to generate. So I'm going to say range 0, 11 generate integer from start. Your start is 0, and that is your stop. Okay, to 11 stop value. So it will include 0, but exclude 11. Okay, which means it will generate. So which means it generates integers 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 10. You're not reaching 11 because 11 is excluded. So 0 all the way to 10. All right. So let's do print I and run it. And I have I takes the value first 0, and then subsequent value is 1, and then you print it. Third value is 2, and so on. Okay. Now let me ask you these questions. What is going to be displayed? what it's going to generate? Sorry. Generate 0, 1, 2. Is it going to be 4? Yes, no, yes? No. We always exclude the stop value. Okay, so you start with 0, you exclude 4, you stop at 3. So this is the stop value, you exclude it. Okay, so this is how they are defined in Python. It might be defined differently in other programming language. So you just have to look at the documentation. What it does is actually tell you already here. It includes start, excludes stop. Okay, so the same. So you include start 0, but you exclude stop. So you stop at 11 minus 1, 10. Here's the same thing. This is a stop value. You don't include it. You stop exactly at 4 minus 1, which is 3. All right, so why do we need it? For example, in our places here. Okay, I don't want to explicitly having to write the indices from 0 to 10, okay? From 0 to 10. So in my cases here, so quiz has length 11. That means it has 11 elements. So the indices are 0 to 10. All right, so to generate it, okay, I don't want to write down a list from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 9, all the way to 10. To generate it, I will use range. Okay, range 0 all the way to 11. Because it's not going to include 11, it will stop one step before 11, which is 10. So it's going to generate integers from 0 all the way to 10, include 10 itself. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do. So for index in range 0 to 11, this will generate integers from 0, 1, all the way to 10. It doesn't include 11. One step before 11, which is 10. Okay, so now this will be my final code. As you can see here, this is generated automatically. When I run these functions here, range, I don't write it down 0 all the way to 10 myself explicitly. Now, imagine if you have, say, 100 quizzes. Okay, suppose you have 100 quizzes. You know you have 100 quizzes. The last quiz will have index 99. Okay, 0 to 99 give you 100 quizzes. All right, you start counting from 0. All right, so this, what would be the value? 100 or 101? 100. It will be starting from 0 all the way to 99. Okay, I'm not going to run this because my quiz actually doesn't have doesn't have index 99. Okay, just to give you an example. So first of all, this usage will exclude you from having to write down these 100 numbers and also avoid errors when you do that. Okay, but be aware for Python range, it stopped at this. All right, now I want to say something. So if you by default, so I'm going to say, so by default, if you exclude the start value, okay, if you exclude the start value, it will, so if you exclude the start value, by default, the start value will be 0. So in other words, so range 0, 11 is the same as range 11. Okay, so if you exclude the start value, by default, it will give you the value start to be 0. All right, so in particular, if you want to start from counting from 0, all right, then you can just exclude it because by default it's 0. You can just produce the last the length of the list. Okay, and another thing is that if you have a list of n elements, okay, that means length of the list is n. Okay, then if you want to iterate over the indices, over the indices of the list, you basically iterate over range of, so you can start from 0, okay, but 0 is by default, so I can exclude it. And then when do I stop? All right, so it will be n, okay? It will be n because it will generate integers from 0 all the way to n minus 1. You have only n elements, so the indices start from 0. So the indices starts from 0 all the way to n minus 1, includes n minus 1, okay? So if you want to iterate over the indices, you iterate over range of n. So for any list, so in particular for any list L, okay, iterate over the list is to iterate over range of length of L. Okay, so in other words, first of all, I don't want to count it. I don't want to count how many elements are there in the quiz. All right, so I'm gonna do length of quiz. All right, so for every index in range length of quiz, this will generate integers from 0. Remember, when I exclude the start value by default will be 0, 1, and all the way to length of the quiz minus 1. All right, good. So this will be my final, the final code. All right. So this has the advantage that you don't count the quiz itself. Okay. So if the quiz, so for example, maybe I have added new quiz. There will be quiz 12, for example. Say there are 12 quizzes, so I add one more value here. So you don't want to have to change it yourself. All right, you don't want to have to change it yourself. When you change it, you run this code, it will be updated to the updated value of quiz by itself. Okay, so when you want to run the indices over a certain list, for example, in this case, quiz here, you run it over range, length of quiz. Okay, so far, any questions? If not, let's look at this here again. So we have learned if statement. All right, we have learned if statements. We're gonna incorporate if statement inside our loop here. We're gonna learn for loop today. Next, we're gonna learn about while loop. So there are other loops. So these are all part of the iterations, different way of writing it. All right, it's not just different way. Certain loops can only be written using a different loop, not for loop. All right. So let's look at this one here. This will display all the quiz and its corresponding score. Now, if I'm only interested in some of them, say I'm only interested those that are perfect scores. So I want to know which score number that I did perfectly. This is my best quiz. This is the one that I'm very good at. I want to know which one. All right, so this is where we're going to use the if statement inside our for loop. All right, so we're going to copy here. Okay, so we're going to run an if statement. To identify quiz number that has score 5, for example. So example, if I want to know all quizzes that have score 5. Okay, so I'm going to run an if statement. So I'm not going to print all. I'm not interested in other quiz score. I'm only interested in those who have score 5. Okay, so I'm going to run an if statement here. If quiz of index, that means the score of quiz at this index, or the value of at index of quiz is equals to 5. Okay, if the score is equals to 5, or the value at this index of quiz is equals to 5, then I only print it. The rest I don't care. I only interested in those that are score 5. So I'm gonna run this, and I get this. So it say that quiz 0 has score 5, quiz 4 has score 5, and quiz 8 has score 5. So this is an if statement inside a for loop. So it do the same thing as you already know. Okay, so for index in this range, remember, you substitute range here. Conceptually, you know what is range. It generates integers from 0, 1, all the way to length of quiz minus 1. In our case, length of quiz is 11. So it will generate integers from 0, 1, all the way to 10. Okay, so at the first iteration, index will take the value 0. Okay, so at the first iteration, index is 0. Okay, so because range generate this number here, all right, and then it will go to line 2. So line 1, okay, index is 0. First iteration, index is 0. Okay, so it will go to line 2. Okay, in line 2, it will test whether quiz of 0 is equals to 5. Test whether quiz of 0 is equals to 5. Okay, is that true? So look at your quiz here. The first quiz is 5, I think. Yes. So quiz 0 is equals to 5. Okay. So quiz 0 is 5, which is true. Okay. If it's true, it will go to line 3. So if this if statement is true, it will execute the block of the if statement, which is in line 3. You go to line 3 and you're going to display a print. So display print message. So display message. Okay, so it will print quiz 0 has scored 5. All right. Now that's not the end. After you at the line 3, you go back to line 1. So once again, it's not the end because there are still elements in our iteration. So go back to line 1. Now index takes the value of 1 because it generates 0, 1, 2. So subsequent iteration will take the value 1. So index now is 1. It will go to line 2 and test whether quiz 1 is equals to 5. Now quiz 1 is not equals to 5. It's false. So if this statement is false, it will not execute line 3. Okay, so it will not execute line 3. And then you go back to line 1 again. You continue the iteration. You repeat this basically. As you can see what I'm doing here, I'm repeating things. So now the value of index changed to 2. You go to line 2 and you test whether quiz 2 is equals to 5. In this case, again, it's false. And you continue again. You go to line 1 again. Now the next value of index now is 3. You test whether quiz 3 is equals to 5. It's again false. You don't do anything. And then you continue. Index now is 4. You go to line 2. And then you check whether quiz 4 is equals to 5. In this case, it's true. So once it's true, it's going to go to line 3. So now you go to line 3 and you're going to display message. Okay. And so on and so forth. Okay, so you're going to continue all the way for length of quiz iterations for this number of iterations. Okay, because it has this number of elements in quiz and you're iterating over it, over the instances of it. So it will run this line 1 here 11 times. All right, so this is the idea. Now, if I give you this, if I say now I'm interested, suppose I'm not interested in the perfect score. I'm interested in the score, in the quiz number of those quiz, interested in those quizzes that have score less than 3. Suppose I say, okay, those that has less than 3 are the one that I'm very weak at. I need to look at and revise this quiz again for my midterm. For my exam 1, I need to look at these quizzes again. Okay, so what should I change here? Sorry? What should I change here? I'm only interested in those that are less than 3. If those that are less than 3, I'm going to print it. What should I change here? Good job. So I'm not interested in those that are equals to 5. I'm those that are less than 3. So here you go. So this basically say that, okay, quiz 5, quiz 6, and 7 is very weak. Go back and revise it for your exam, for example. Okay, so this is how you use if inside your for loop. I'm gonna continue again on Wednesday. Thank you, class. And please take your graded quiz 4 here at the front.